including the economy, wage negotiations, infrastructure, and energy. To discuss these issues at length, we have analyst Jan Hofmeyr, who heads the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation Policy and Analysis Program, as well as Abdul Aziz Davids, Head of Research at Kagiso Asset Management. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to ITV. President Jacob Zuma has shortly delivered his State of the Nation address from Parliament in Cape Town. Please share your initial thoughts on the address, Mr. Hofmeyr.
Well, I think it has been a speech that was really packed with facts and figures, quite dense, I think, in a sense. But I think it was not necessarily a speech that has been memorable because of the absence of a thread that really sort of ran through this speech itself. One has seen on a number of occasions the President referring to a nation at work, but that narrative didn't really follow through the speech itself. And I think what we would have wanted to hear more clearly is a clear articulation of what he referred to as radical economic transformation that the country would enter into in its second phase of the transition.
Mr. Davids, what are your initial thoughts on the speech?
Shukran for that. I think one of the overriding sort of considerations is the fact that he emphasized the economy and the need that there needs to be serious redress in terms of our current state of play. I think one has to contextualize the state of the nation address in terms of looking what is currently happening in the economy. We know this platinum strike that's been going on now for almost 6 months. As we stand tonight, we still don't know if the platinum strike has been resolved or not. I think the platinum companies have received ample sort of counter proposal, if I can call it that. But as we stand, there's still a platinum strike. We know the impact that has had on the first quarter GDP numbers. The fact that that will continue into the second quarter, I mean, the second quarter is almost finished now. The fact that earlier this evening, Eskom announced that there'll be load shedding. I'm surprised we've got the lights on in the studio. But, I mean, that's the background. And I think with that background and that severe sort of economic impacts, I was a bit disappointed. I mean, I would have expected a lot more focus on the economy in terms of actual action plans. There was very little detail in terms of the true action plans that he will embark on. I think what is clear is that the narrative is a good one in terms of striking the right notes, saying the right things. He's the ultimate politician, really. But given his track record, I mean, this is his second 5-year term now. We heard in the first sort of 5-year, the first sort of period, his focus was on job creation, 1 million jobs in the first 5 years. We know that hasn't materialized. So I think a lot of the rhetoric is powerful. It sounds very good. It's easy on the on the ear, and obviously it resonates with the populace. And obviously every time we got the ovation and the applause, the real tricky thing is implementation. And I think unfortunately, if one look at what is in the cupboard in terms of the ministers, the changes that is made to the personnel in terms of the portfolios, etc., it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. But on the other hand, I am an optimist, so hopefully we'll see some sort of redress coming through and some clear action plan in terms of implementing some of the things that he's talked about, which we'll probably analyze later this evening as well.
I think we can definitely see a common thread in terms of the nation is looking to him with very similar concerns. And we can see that highlighted in terms of he's touched on it, although maybe he hasn't come forward with any kind of set plans, we definitely can see that there are set goals, and everybody has the same issues at hand. You know, now that Jacob Zuma has entered his second term as president, following grueling elections in 2014, South Africa has celebrated 20 years. It truly is a phenomenal year for South Africans. And now that he's been voted in for a second time, I think South Africans are really looking to him for solutions to the social and economic challenges.
Correct. I think, a president, especially in his first term, has to ensure that he covers all bases, that he satisfies the electorate and also his colleagues within government to ensure that there is a second term to enter to. But now President Zuma has entered into his second term, and I think what one would want to sort of expect from him is also something that he can work unencumbered towards a legacy as well, because every president will also want to be remembered for something. The president has or should be remembered, I think, as the president under which the National Development Plan was launched and also accepted by his party. and that will probably be his legacy. I think the most important thing now is going over into implementation. I think we've heard a lot about the plan in recent years. Interestingly, tonight there was very little mention. I think there were 2 mentions of the plan itself. So what we would want to see is how implementation is going to take place.
On the topic of implementation, we obviously look to the ministries to come forward with plans in that regard. Let us discuss the new elected 5th Parliament. We have seen a growth in the cabinet. South Africa now has 72 people in Zuma's cabinet, 35 ministers, 37 deputies, as opposed to countries like the US, whose cabinet comprises of only 15, or the UK, whose cabinet comprises of 22. This has definitely been an underlying theme. People are really discussing it. What are your thoughts on the size of the cabinet? Do you think that the cabinet truly impacts, or the size impacts on the overall productivity of governance?
I think from an economic point of view, if I can maybe just add my view to this, is that, over the past and in most countries that we've seen, when you have big government, you tend to have big expenditure, and you tend to have bureaucracy coming through, red tape, etc. Small governments is always more efficient, so that's sort of the first statement to make. If one looks at the actual personnel, I think the key portfolios in our South African context are probably finance and energy. In finance, we've got continuity. Obviously, Pravin Gordhan has, obviously, if I can say, he's been moved sideways, if it's not a demotion. But obviously, he's sort of, the current sort of minister has been his deputy for the last 5 years. So I think that is encouraging, and obviously the financial markets were encouraged by that appointment. As we saw with the Rand, I think the Rand strengthened on the day of the announcement. My biggest concern is around energy. If one looks at the minister in that portfolio, she doesn't have a great track record in government. We know the fisheries department that she's left has been a troubled one. And I think energy, where we are, we earlier referred to the Eskom crisis that we currently have. And in the speech, President Zuma obviously made references to energy, he made references to Eskom, the need to obviously build alternative source of energy as well. And I think that is a crucial portfolio. You want almost a technocrat there rather than a bureaucrat. And you want somebody there that, first of all, has respect of the industry. And given the vastness of that portfolio in terms of the various forms of energy, the complicated structures involved in terms of setting pricing with NERSA, etc., I'm less encouraged. And obviously the key challenge here is in terms of execution. But yeah, as I said, obviously that is a big risk. And the fact that everything else flows from energy. If the lights are not on, the economy grinds to a halt. And that's really the key challenge for us going forward as well.
Mr. Davids, you're definitely touching on a very key contentious issue in many regards, which is the allocation of various ministers within the cabinet. And you have mentioned Tina Joemat-Pettersson, who's now newly elected as Minister of Energy, saying that she's perhaps not the best choice. And we have seen some interesting movements within the cabinet in terms of many perplexing allocations. Your thoughts on that and what we could expect from various allocations and ministries in the next 5 years regarding the specific allocations of individuals to portfolios?
I think one has to look at the different clusters that exist within the system of governance. And I think as far as the economic cluster is concerned, we have seen a fair extent of continuity. We've mentioned Mr. Nene just now. He's been the understudy to former Finance Minister Manuel and also to former Finance Minister Gordhan. So I think, there we have continuity with other ministers also staying in their positions. Minister Davies, Trade and Industry, and Minister Patel in Economic Development. And I think that is also what investors, potential investors, look at for that kind of continuity. So I think there is some consistency and predictability that people are also looking for. I agree on the question of energy, a critical question. We've heard that we need radical economic transformation and also substantial levels of growth, but without energy to support that growth, it would not be possible. I think one can even argue we would not be able to afford levels of growth that is required under the current system or the current infrastructure that exists. I think another appointment that might have raised some eyebrows is also the appointment of Minister Ramatlhodi, specifically sort of looking at mining and minerals and so on. I think when investors look at South Africa, primary what comes to mind to them is still the mining sector. The fact that our economy is so resource driven, and what we've seen in recent years, and particularly also in recent months, as far as the strike on the platinum belt is concerned, is that that people would want predictability. People who put their shares in South Africa wants predictability, and that appointment of Minister Ramatlhodi, not really having had experience in that field, is somewhat sort of interesting, I think.
If I can maybe just comment on that, because Absolutely. I think if one looks at the previous Minister of Minerals, Susan Sabango, she didn't cover herself in glory by almost antagonizing all the players in the industry, both the mining companies as well as labour as well. And I think if one looks at the Marikana events of 2012, her handling of that wasn't ideal. So I think obviously with the new minister coming in, his first almost on baptism of fire was to try and negotiate a resolution to the strike. The fact that he hasn't been able to do that, I think, speaks more to the players rather than to him. And I think it obviously is very sort of insightful that he's been driving that process. He's also made noises about getting sort of government intervention where there's an extended deadlock in terms of a strike going on more than 3 months, for example. We know the strike has been going on almost for 6 months now. But I think, as Robert said, obviously the key, the issue around minerals and mineral resources and utilization of that, that's an imperative. And obviously we interact with investors, we interact with shareholders in these mining companies. And the two things that they crave for is regulatory certainty, especially around tenure of assets. And obviously, if you've got rights, mineral rights to mine, to sort of explore for resources, you want certainty of tenure in terms of your ability to extract as much resources as possible during the period that you've got that allocation for. That's the first thing. The second thing that they would actually like is regulatory sort of certainty around implementation of policies. I think it's one thing, and we've seen it in other emerging countries. Argentina comes to mind, for example. If government changes the rules of the game, then it places everybody on an uncertain footing, and it's very difficult to operate. If you know the rules of the game before you go into the game, sorry, I'm using these analogies. There's a FIFA World Cup going on, but that it just puts all the players at ease. And the big risk that we have is that midway through and before halftime, we start changing the rules of the game. And I think in that environment, it's very difficult for these companies to operate in. We have seen, as I said, in other countries, even these democratic countries, first world countries, where they've implemented socialist sort of practices and policies as well. So these are not new policies and practices. I think the big risk that we run as a country is if we start implementing them haphazardly, without due consultation with all the players, and with almost no regard for the key providers of capital. And to that end, we saw on Friday, for example, Friday the 13th, S&P and Fitch downgrading both our bonds and our currencies. And I think the bigger outlook, in terms of their outlook, is obviously negative. And the big implication for that is that S&P in particular, they alluded to the fact that we've had this strike now for 6 months. And there seems to be first an inability, but then also an almost unwillingness from certain participants to see a quick resolution to the strike. And I think that speaks volumes rather to, and as I said earlier, it's all good and well to speak about and have this wonderful address, but implementation is key. And that speaks to the heart of the problems that we face as a country as well.
Mr. Davis, what you're touching on, obviously, in the broader picture, obviously, is economic investment, which is key to the functioning of any economy, and it comes back to that, and that's kind of been the main focus, I think, of today's address. And it seems to be the word that's on everyone's lips is, the economy. For the next 5 years to come, you tied it in, you spoke about minister allocations and that sort of thing, and stability and continuity. What do you think we can expect for the next 5 years to come regarding the changes that we've seen?
Well, I think we will see quite a lot of more sort of rhetoric around the national development plan, as mentioned earlier as well. I think government will want to make it its mainstay sort of or flagship design or economic design, and also something for ordinary South Africans to rally around. So I think one would sort of hear much more about the plan itself. I think, what if I was President Zuma, I would sort of encourage also greater levels of accountability within the system of governance itself. Something that I think it is important to touch upon is a softer issue that does not necessarily have to do with the implementation of policy itself. But if one looks at what has happened in the last couple of months around the platinum belt strike, but I think also within our economy is that there has been a fragmentation of key policy stakeholders. We've seen that that there has been sort of a split within Labour itself. There has been a lack of unity within business itself on their positions on specific policies. And also, I think, between government departments. And what we've seen President Zuma also asking tonight again is a greater need for consensus amongst these stakeholders, and that will need to be prioritized.
Thank you, Mr. Hofmeyr. Please stay tuned after the break. We will be discussing this more at length. We will be discussing the economic, political, and social issues. Join us after the break. We'll be right back.
South Africa's premier Islamic event, the 9th National Quran Memorization Competition Finals 1435, will be held on Saturday, 21st of June at the Nizamiya Masjid in Midrand. Winners will represent South Africa at the International Quran Memorization Competition in Makkah, in addition to worth over 100,000 rand. Program will commence with Maghrib prayers, separate ladies' facilities inside the masjid. Do not miss this opportunity to listen to some of the finest reciters of the Noble Quran from around the country. This event is organized by the South African National Quran Committee under the auspices of the Religious Attaché, Royal Embassy of Saudi Arabia, and is proudly sponsored by Absa Islamic Banking, Sidgars Vereniging, Forshare Motors Vereniging, Creative Curve, Neon Printers, and World of Fragrances.
Rescue 786 ambulance services. The only affordable option is 650 rands per call-out. 13 qualified paramedics, 4 ambulances, responded to over 1,300 call-outs, covering the greater Johannesburg region and available 24/7. We also offer level 1 to 3 first aid training. Remember, by law, all community events must have at least 1 ambulance on standby, and businesses need at least 1 fully trained first aider on their premises. For more information, please call 083 9000 786. A project of Radio Islam and Jamiatul Ulama.
Get this fossil for an unbeatable 1,790 rand, or this police for 1,290 rand, Jacques Le Mans for 1,495 rand, and edifice for 1,550 rand, only at Jewelers World.
IBO have become synonymous with world-famous brands, which are now available to discerning clients at their store just off Marlborough Drive in Sandton. We feature a wide selection of fine branded shirts as ideal accessories to quality suits and jackets available in-store at affordable prices. So come visit us today or give us a call. IBO, international brands at the best prices.
Fruit 10 aloe vera juice. No preservatives, no additives. Good till the last bits. Taste it, you'll love it. Another quality product from Marhaba Trading.
What do you seek? Empowerment, fulfillment, knowledge, strength, success. Structured around the 5 sciences of Islam, a 1-year intensive course at Medina Institute will equip you with the tools to navigate your way through the deen. With teachings that prioritize the Quran and authentic Sunnah, Medina Institute is a place of critical thinking and theological reflection. Achieve greatness under the guidance of Sheikh Muhammad bin Yahya al-Ninawi and leading Islamic scholars from around the world. Experience the essence and spirit of Medina distilled into the foundation of this prestigious institute. Harness Cape Town's rich Islamic heritage and join a hand-picked group of students. Find light, find knowledge, aspire to know more, to be more. Illuminate your future. Apply today.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to iTV's State of the Nation analysis. Before the break, we were discussing the social, economic and political issues facing South Africa in light of President Jacob Zuma's State of the Nation address. Joining us in studio is Jan Hofmeyr, an analyst from the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation, as well as Abdul Aziz Davids, Head of Research at Kagiso Asset Management. Welcome back to everyone. Before the break, we were discussing various ministers and their allocations. Moving on to something new that we've seen in 2014, we have seen the formation of 3 new ministries in government: the Department of Small Business, the Department of Telecommunications and Postal Services, as well as Water and Sanitation. Let us discuss the validity of these new ministries and what can South Africa expect from them. Mr. Hofmeyr.
Well, I'll try to cover a few. I think the Ministry of Small Enterprises under Minister Lindiwe Zulu is probably a ministry that many people have requested in many years to deal with the large amount of red tape that is involved for young upcoming entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in general to start new businesses. I think the one question that one sort of has to ask is what kind of bureaucracy and what kind of support such a ministry would have. This ministry will, I think, also fall within the economics cluster, and one will have to see how the competing interests within this cluster play themselves out. I think it is an important ministry, but it will also be one that will have to establish itself. I think, as we've also seen tonight, the Ministry of Post and Telecommunications have been created with a specific purpose, and that is also to act as a source of economic empowerment also to citizens. So again, it has been created with a specific purpose. Again, bureaucracy will have to be created. The questions of sanitation and water tonight featured also quite strongly as far as local government is concerned. It seems to be a key priority delivery to South Africa's most marginalized people. Question is whether a new ministry had to be created and in order to deliver, as time will tell.
Mr. David, yes, please proceed.
If I can add to that, I think of the 3, probably the most important one is the small business one. We've got almost a national plague of unemployment, and I think we've seen historically, and studies have proven that small businesses are the true engines of job creation. And I think in South Africa we've got a dire need for job creation, but also entrepreneurship as well. Typically you have one entrepreneur creating 5 jobs. So if you can get a culture of fostering and empowering people to be entrepreneurs, and be it social entrepreneurs that eventually become profitable sort of capitalist entrepreneurs, I think that will be key to the actual eradication of this massive jobless sort of situation that we have as a country. And if one looks at it, one of the biggest inhibitors of our economic growth, and the President talked about the 5% growth target by 2019, for example, I think that is very ambitious. If one looks at over the last 10 years, we've averaged around 3.5% growth rates. So to target 5% is a significant number. But key to that, achieving that number, would be small businesses. And I think, as my colleague has said, I mean, with all of these ministers, it creates bureaucracy, it creates red tape, processes, the new forms that have to be printed, etc. Whereas if you just implement regulation and just try and streamline government and make it more efficient, I think there was a study that showed that we rank as one of the lowest in Africa in terms of just opening a business. I think places like Nigeria superseded us in just the speed at which they can open a business, for example. The fact that we've got such archaic sort of rules and regulations around how to employ people. And the fact that, something like a closed corporation has been closed down. You now have to have a private company. And the red tape around that as well. I think just taking away some of those regulatory burdens for small businesses and just allow them to flourish. Obviously within the framework of the wider laws and potentially minimum wage legislation, etc. But just allowing people to free themselves up and just, if you have an idea, start a business and just create jobs that way, rather than creating a specific ministry for that. The other pertinent issues around service delivery and water and sanitation is obviously key to that as well. Again, if government just do their work in terms of implementation, you don't need another ministry for that. And I think the key challenge, again, is service delivery. And we know about the service delivery protests that we've seen continuously throughout this campaign. And it's been a very touchy subject, and it's something that's not going away. But I think ultimately we need people on the ground delivering, and municipalities. And I think probably the most encouraging aspect of these deployments in terms of cabinet and ministers is that Pravin Gordhan is in charge of that portfolio in terms of part of the portfolio of service delivery. I think he's been one of the beacons of light in the cabinet, and he's been one of the star performers. And hopefully can bring some of that professionalism, some of that technocratic ability to his ministry and really deliver services to the public where it's sorely needed as well.
From what I can gather, the thread of what you're saying is really questioning the necessity of the formation of these new ministries, and a concern being the ever-expanding, cabinet growing despite a small tax and an underperforming economy. And that's pretty much where we are in 2014, and I think these are the questions that are really coming out, and precisely what you're saying, the necessity of it really. Our economy is underperforming, our tax base is small, yet our cabinet is growing. It's costing us more than R1 billion a year. The public definitely has a lot of thoughts on that. Any thoughts?
I think, to answer your question, I think I must also concur with Abdul sort of on the question of job creation, and specifically the private sector as a dynamo. You've just referred to the small tax base, and I think should we sort of really free up South African sort of business or entrepreneurs to let their ideas come to life, we might also be able to expand that tax base. And then I think also sort of hopefully that such sort of revenues also be spent wisely. The question you're asking is whether the bureaucracy becomes bloated or not. I think it will all depend on the efficiency with which these structures function, and I think this we will only see sort of in a matter of time. But there are definitely questions around ministries such as water and sanitation.
The key theme of today's State of the Nation address is the economy and ever importantly, job creation, as mentioned. In light that we celebrated Youth Day yesterday, the ANC manifesto has pledged that 60% of all infrastructure-related jobs would go to youths, with more than 6 million jobs hoping to be created over the next 5 years. However, stats show that youth unemployment has risen by 3.4% and now stands at 36.1%. Let's discuss how government should be more involved in tackling this issue specifically.
Yeah. I think, first of all, on the 6 million jobs, that's a very ambitious target. I think if we look at the last numbers, we've got 6 million taxpayers currently that's basically supporting our tax base. So to effectively, hopefully double that, I think is quite ambitious. Unfortunately, government's track record is not great. Previously they promised 1 million jobs. I think effectively only 200,000 was created over the last 5-year period. And I think part of the problem is that if one looks at the blame game, and the SONA in particular, there's always a blame game if you read the thread. The president also blames the global financial crisis, and that happened in 2008, 2009. I think part of the problems, rightly so, you can say has been the external factors that we've seen, but a lot of it is, you can almost say, is self-inflicted in terms of what we have seen. Part of the problem with youth joblessness, as you referred to it, is around skills, and the fact that if one looks at it from primary, secondary, and tertiary level, the progression and the dropout rate that we see is very significant. We interact with the manufacturers in South Africa, and the fundamental problem is that we're importing skills, but yet you're sitting with almost 50% unemployment. The reality is we don't have the right qualified and the right skilled labor in this country, and as a result, this endemic unemployment and joblessness that we have will be around. The real way to address that is to better education, and government, to its credit, identified FETs and some of the CETAs as probably the correct vehicles for that. But the fundamental problem, again, is around delivery. A lot of the CETAs have unspent budgets, for example. We interact with the financial sector CETA. And it's always amazing to find that the lack of skills and the lack of ability in those sort of CETAs, I think it again speaks to the ability to get the right skills in the right areas. There's a lot to be desired, but I think I'm hopeful. I think there's a lot of promise out there. The frameworks have been created, but ultimately it's around skills development and getting the necessary skills transfer to happen as well. And unfortunately, it's not a quick fix. It's not a 2-year, even a 5-year solution. It's probably a multi-decade solution, and you need to start at the grassroots level in terms of the right education structures and ultimately getting it through tertiary level as well.
You have both mentioned earlier, and President Zuma addressed this extensively in his talk as well, the economic issues, most notably South Africa dealing with the 5-month-long wage strike in the mining sector. It really has crippled the economy. We are definitely seeing the effects of it now. And most recently, we have seen newly proposed amendments to the labour laws, which would make state intervention possible when talks deadlock. Share your thoughts on this. Mr. Aziz, perhaps.
Yeah, we've been intimately involved on that side. We obviously in the asset management area, and we interact with the platinum companies quite extensively. Fundamental to them, again, and speaking not on their behalf, but some of the concerns that they raise is around changing the rules of the game, as I've mentioned earlier. I think what we have seen is that the worst case scenario is if government has that sort of veto power in a deadlock situation, what sort of rules are implemented. And all they want is for the rules to be fair to both parties. Unfortunately, the rhetoric and the background and the historical narrative hasn't been that great. And you always find winners and losers in that situation. So that's not ideal. I think the Labour Relations Act itself needs a major overhaul. There's aspects to it which you can probably validly claim is unconstitutional. And I think, again, obviously there are labour issues and the rights of labour, the rights of workers to a fair wage, and we all support that. I think fundamental to it is attracting the right capital. And in President Zuma's address, he referred to the fact that we need capital to come into the country. I was quite amazed that prior, I think in the last month, he had extensive meetings with captains of industry, as he put it. Which I think is quite refreshing and quite encouraging, because it does give you a different perspective. And I think ultimately what we need is the right framework to be in place. Let's face it, South Africa is not a bastion of investment attractiveness. We're competing with Nigeria, which has now superseded us as the largest economy in Africa. We're competing with North Africa. We're competing with Angola, Mozambique, where they also have abundant resources that have been discovered in the last 5 to 10 years. So we can't claim that we rightfully deserve to be invested in. We need to create the climate for investment. And unfortunately, what we have seen is that the rhetoric, and especially prior to the elections and leading up to the elections, hasn't been great. We interact with foreign investors, and they get scared when they hear about nationalization. They get scared when they hear about the captains of industry and shareholders getting zero return, for example. All of those things, you're competing on a global footing. And it's one thing to create an environment. It's another to obviously attract the capital. And I think that environment needs to be created in South Africa to really see us attracting significant capital into this industry.
Do you think that President Jacob Zuma has made enough progress in the way that we could see a proper foundation being put in place where we can really see significant building being done on that foundation in the next 5 years to come, where we can sit here hopefully 5 years from now, look back and monitor progress that's been made?
I think before I answer that question, maybe just to latch on to the previous question, I think the key words here are sort of consistency and predictability. And when one talks about consistency also in the labour regime and state intervention as well, there also has to be clarity what government refers to in that regard. I think what we do not want is a repeat of the Barricada tragedy where government sort of intervened, or the police force intervened quite radically in a situation and probably caused more harm than anything else. So I think that is very important. The second important point that one has to make is that probably it might become a bit easier for government to moderate its labour sort of legislation, specifically sort of given the fragmentation that is increasingly taking place within labour itself. One is seeing the divisions that is occurring within COSATU at the moment. NUMSA raising the possibility of forming a worker party sort of in the longer term. The divisions or the separation of the mining unions between AMCU and the NUM. So there might be scope in future for government to tackle these issues now that labour is also becoming somewhat weaker. I think just to come back to the question then of the foundations that need to be put in place, and I think the important foundation that does need to be put in place is a restitution of trust in our institutions that are supposed to mediate such conflicts. And I think sort of one key institution is NETLAC. The President also referred to NETLAC tonight, and also that Deputy President Ramaphosa will head a sort of a NETLAC unit that will specifically look at more cohesiveness. I think it is therefore very important also for South Africans to have their faith restored in NETLAC as an institution itself in the longer term, and that I think would be one of the key responsibilities of the second administration of President Zuma.
Staying on the topic of economic growth, and in terms of job creation as well, South Africa's goal has been to stimulate growth above 6% in order to create 500,000 jobs. However, Zuma's address comes in the wake of a 0.6% contraction in the economy. The World Bank revised its predicted economic growth from 2.7% to just 2%. In light of these proposed projections for the economy, what can we expect from the economy under President Jacob Zuma within the next 5 years?
Well, the last 5 years haven't been great. As I said earlier, we averaged around 2%, 2.5% over the last 5 years. And if one looks at it in a global context, I mean, coming out of the global financial crisis, we were actually one of the better performing economies 2010, 2011. But then we started to eat our snags and really started to underperform. We need economic growth of around 3.5% just to match our economic potential. So that output gap that economists refer to, that 1%, 1.5% output gap, has been growing over the last couple of years. And that has contributed to a lot of the issues that we're currently faced with. I think fundamental to the next 5 years, as we've discussed, our mining sector, as Janus mentioned earlier, has been a key driver of our economic growth. And that's been the reality. And if one looks at over the last 5 years, we've had anything from very violent strikes starting in 2012. We've got severe sort of Section 54 stoppages that we've had. So our mining output has been declining for the last couple of years. I think if one get a situation where a lot of that can be redressed, you'll probably be on a path to a much better economic future as well.
Thank you so much. Please join us as we'll be back right after the break.
ESOP's home from our 8 stores. Visit esops.co.za.
Designers Lounge, a multi-brand luxury boutique located in the heart of Johannesburg, Norwood. We are the most exclusive store in South Africa right now, showcasing the finest collections of Eastern couture. The most prominent designers from the Asian fashion world are brought together under one roof for the first time in the region, allowing fashionistas the opportunity to own these season's latest creations. We stock a range of bridals, formals, party wear, tunics, evening gowns, saris and abayas. Designers Lounge, bringing to you the leading designers of the Asian fashion world.
The future is unpredictable. That's why you need a Sharia financial specialist to guide you to success.
Since 1968, Anglo-Rand has provided our clients with industry-leading financial services amounting to over 5 billion rand under management. We offer world-class guidance through our Sharia interactive traders specializing in online share and CFD trading, forex products and fixed sukuk investments which yield up to 11% return per annum. Our products are approved by an independent Sharia supervisory board. Anglo-Rand, secure your future, secure your success.
As you know, Ramadan is in the heart of winter, when families living in poverty are cold, hungry, and in dire need of assistance. We at Mr. Rafin Foundation actively go into the communities to support the needy with feeding, clothing, and disaster relief. If everyone helps their neighbor, nobody will need help. That is why we call on you to please assist us by donating food, warm clothing, and monetary funds to Mr. Rafin. And we'll make sure that during Ramadan, residents around the Western Cape will be taken care of. Make a difference today.
Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to iTV. You were joining us for analysis of the State of the Nation 2014. We were chatting to our guests in studio regarding the social, political and economic challenges facing South Africa. Welcome back. Mr. Aziz and Mr. Hofmeyr, we were chatting before the break regarding job creation, economic issues facing South Africa. One of the major themes running through President Zuma's State of the Nation address today was the issue of energy and sustainable energy. We spoke about wind, solar, and biomass. Your thoughts?
Yeah, if I can maybe start off, I think that's nothing new. I think it has been mentioned in previous State of the Nation addresses. I think critical to that is we want regulatory certainty. If one looks at, for example, the biomass situation, in particular sugar, for example, or sugar cane was mooted a couple of times in the last 5 years as a potential energy source to that. And unfortunately what we have seen is that NERSA, in terms of providing a tariff regime and providing a regulatory framework, has been absent in these discussions. We've had interactions with the sugar industry, for example, and they're pulling their hair out because they've got capacity, they've got technical know-how. If one looks at Southern African players like Mozambique and Swaziland are already doing certain of these things. The irony is Swaziland is providing electricity and they also import electricity from South Africa. So in a way, it's South African electricity that is being used in Swaziland via the sugar industry rather than in South Africa directly. So I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of just using the existing regulatory framework and just implementation. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that. Another area of, in terms of energy is around shale gas and the potential for fracking. I know it's very controversial. We've got the Greenies up in arms in terms of especially the Kalahari area. But I think one will actually do a disservice and injustice to South Africa if we don't tap into that potential and really just assess what is out there. If there is potential, then and it is economically viable, then I think it's in the country's best interest to obviously develop that as well.
Mr. Aziz, we have not even had a time to touch on the most contentious issues, but in conclusion, given the latest economic and political trends, what do you think we're likely to see in the next 5 years, and is it anything different than what we've seen in the last 5 years before?
I think a difficult one. We mentioned earlier that if President Zuma sees out this 5-year term, it will be the first time that you've got a president completing successfully 2 terms. I think President Mandela only completed 1. President Thabo Mbeki was recalled in the 2nd term. So it'll be the first time that you have got a sitting president actually completing 2 terms. I think it's unlikely. I think you'll probably, there'll be some sort of changes midway through. But I think fundamentally, if in the next 5 years we can harness the potential, and South Africa is blessed with abundant of resources. We know the mineral resources in this country, and also the primary resources in terms of agriculture, etc. We should be the engine room of Africa. We should be both in terms of food provision, but also in terms of energy and in terms of the mineral resources as well. Unfortunately, we've lagged behind other African countries. Nigeria's overtaken us in terms of being the largest economy in Africa as well. And I think if the next 5 years we can really focus, as I've said earlier, on the primary levels, the secondary and tertiary levels in terms of education, and really forget almost about the next 5 years. Look at it in the next 10, 15, 20 years, and bring up that culture of education through. I think South Africa can reestablish its position as being the dominant force and economic sort of powerhouse in Africa as well.
I hope in the next 5 years or next 10 or 15 years, we do see South Africa reclaim its #1 position as the engine of Africa. Thank you. Mr. Hofmeyr, do you expect to see anything different in the next 5 years?
I think if there is anything different, we wouldn't have received many clues in tonight's speech. I think to come back to the term radical economic transformation that the President has referred to, the word radical is quite a weighty word, and I think it creates expectations among South Africans that something very different is going to happen during this period. And one should expect them then also to hold the Zuma administration to account for this. What I interpret the meaning of radical in this regard is radical continuity of policy, specifically the National Development Plan, and the promise also of radical implementation, not really a radical change in policy or ideological orientation.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us so much on iTV. Thank you to all our guests who were watching. For iTV, I'm Nuha Razak. Enjoy the rest of your evening.